All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. That Centene move is remarkable and something that will play into the conversation that we're about to have with not only a member of Congress, but one of the only physicians who's going to be voting on this bill whenever this does happen. Today, tomorrow, we can bring you up to date right now. We're waiting for a vote on a rule here on the House floor, and the potential for a full floor vote could be today, tonight, tomorrow morning, maybe on the 4th of July, as we just discussed with Laura Davison. It appears nobody's going home until this is done, unless, of course, this is really derailed with worries about debt and deficit, with worries about changes, dare I use the word cuts to Medicaid, and a couple of other matters. It does seem the SALT caucus has come around, but there are a lot of questions right now about what this is going to bring to the floor. The members of the Freedom Caucus, the fiscal hawks who oppose this, are meeting at the White House right now. And we're joined in studio by a Republican member of Congress who you've heard from before on this program, who was in fact treating Medicaid patients as recently as yesterday. Greg Murphy from North Carolina. Great to see you, and welcome back to Bloomberg.
Thank you.
It's quite a moment that we're in right now, and you have a unique perspective. I like to think that your colleagues are asking for your advice on this. And I want your input on the changes to Medicaid. Before we get that far, does this rule even get to the floor today? What's the state of play?
Well, I think the rule gets to the floor. Whether it passes or not is the real question. Because, we don't pass the rule, basically it is a stop. Mm-hmm. It is not, if the bill doesn't pass, things can be dead. If we don't pass the rule, it brings us a chance to come back and address concerns that maybe different portions of the House caucus made or have. And, things getting directly from the Senate, that's what they wanted, great. But if we have questions about them or real concerns about them, there needs to be a mechanism, I think, to get those addressed. Mm-hmm. So that's where we are.
When it comes to Medicaid, we've talked about this before, and I know that you supported eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse from the program. You've spoken openly about that. There are other changes and potential cuts that you might be worried about. There's also the matter of the provider tax and what it means for rural hospitals. Give us the physician's view here.
Yeah, I think if we back up, this is an exceedingly overly complex system of Medicaid reimbursement where we have, things where the hospitals tax themselves, send the money to the state, and the state then draws down more money to give back to the hospitals. Yeah. You have these direct funds, you have indirect funds. It is a very, very complex scheme, as if it will. And what's been allowed to happen really over the last couple decades, especially the last decade, is a lot of drawdowns from the federal government to do things that states really should be doing on themselves. Mm-hmm. North Carolina just expanded Medicaid a couple years ago, and that brings an entirely new population in. I was in favor of that because those are our working poor, the farmers, the fishermen, the clergy, the people in eastern North Carolina that are working but just simply can't afford health care. We want to attack this, and the House version was waste, fraud, and abuse. Nobody can argue with those things. Getting people off the rolls that were illegally on the rolls or illegally in the country or were able-bodied. The Senate has taken a little bit different approach. It's kind of one of those things that it's like, I'll use the basketball analogy. It's not the first foul you see, it's the reaction to the foul. And the first foul we've seen, really a lot happened with the Biden administration of expanding the Medicaid rolls to people that honestly should not be eligible, are not eligible to be on this. So it's trying to now correct that, and we look like we're the bad guys because we're the second person seen as the foul, and trying to fix a system and reform a system for those individuals who truly deserve it.
That's quite an analogy. So are you close to a yes, or are you stuck on this right now? Would you vote for this bill?
I am in the information gathering stage. I will tell you this, as a surgeon, we always measure twice and cut once. That's just what we do. And usually surgeons are pretty direct and we go through things, but this is too important just for a knee-jerk response. Look, I'm on Trump's team. I want him to succeed, but I also think he wants the best package possible delivered to the American people.
Well, this is interesting because I know that you support Donald Trump.
Sure.
But you also see a window that's not necessarily closing here. We don't have to manage the debt limit, for instance, until we're probably into August.
Yeah.
That gives you a whole other month to work on this, right?
Yeah, but time is of the essence. We do want to get this done now. We don't want to sit there and let this drag out because there are some, truth be told, some political concerns to do this. But we have a chance. We have a moment in time really to get this right, stop some of the abuses that are occurring within the Medicaid system. I mean, there are, not only on the individual level, but on hospital levels and other levels. There are abuses that have occurred. I was chief of staff of at the time, a $2 billion medical system. And so I know a lot about where the monies come from, where they go. There's a lot of individuals that, there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse that goes in these. Yeah. You know, you see some of these CEOs of hospital systems earning millions and millions of dollars when most of their monies are coming in from taxpayer initiatives. I have a problem with some of that. You know, it's one thing for CEOs that run companies on the 500 index or whatever, but it's a different thing when you're making your money based upon taxpayer dollars. Sure. That said, there are a lot of abuses that go in this system. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get it right. We need to get it right. You know, one other thing I'll just say is in the state of North Carolina, 52% of the births occur to mothers on Medicaid. Wow. So how is this? This is a symptom of a societal issue. Now we're being paid for with Medicaid dollars. And how do we fix that issue, which actually makes then the Medicaid issue much easier to treat? I don't have the answer to that. And I see this all the time, Joe. I see kids coming in having kids, and their grandmother, who's 32, taking care of the child, when the child still is either in high school or trying to figure out if they can go to college or not. That's a systemic issue of society, and we're trying to deal with it, trying to pay for it somehow, which at some point you got to draw the line. We can't keep doing this. We have to have some financial responsibility here.
Is there anyone to tell a story like that to President Trump? I mean, that's an incredible first-hand analysis.
I don't know anybody in Congress that still practices medicine. I'm the only physician that still does. I live in a very, very poor area of eastern North Carolina, which are all Trump supporters. And so I do think it is a message he needs to hear, how critical this is going to be for eastern North Carolina. I'm just trying to figure out how to thread this needle, you know, to fulfill the agenda that the president wants, but at the same time to make sure that access is affordable and accessible for the patients I see in eastern North Carolina.
When you consider the process here and the potential for another reaction or another foul, you make enough changes, this has to go back to the Senate. Does that need to happen? Or can you make changes without that happening?
I don't know that if we make changes, I think legislatively it has to go back to the Senate. Sure. But, you know, again, you measure twice, you cut once. Yeah. Let's do this right. Let's not try to have to say, well, we'll come back and fix that later. I'm not into that kind of stuff.
Otherwise, you feel like you got jammed by the Senate.
Well, yeah, and, you know, I think the Senate's, the guys and gals were with great intent on what they wanted to do. I had been told there was a lot more discussions about this beforehand, but I think the Senate really actually did close to 90% of what we wanted. The changes were pretty radical changes.
Yeah, boy, that's right. I wanted to ask you about your colleague from North Carolina on the Senate side, Tom Tillis. Pretty remarkable development here. Yeah. James, I don't know if we can get that sound of Senator Tillis on the Senate floor over the weekend. Of course, he's decided not to run for re-election based on a pretty tight jam that he was in, and some would argue that he was facing a very difficult primary to begin with. Let's hear from Senator Tillis, if we can, from earlier on this process.
I'm telling the president that you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate mark will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid. We're going to make sure that we fulfill the promise, and then I can feel good about a bill that I'm willing to vote for. But until that time, I will be withholding my vote.
Pretty passionate stuff. I'm sure you've had a chance to talk to the senator. What would you tell him, though? Is he off on this one?
No, I think there are parts that Senator Tillis is spot on, correct. Yeah. But we're in a system that has exploded. You know, the Biden administration, normally state audits their Medicaid rolls every year. Who's eligible, who's not eligible. The Biden administration didn't want any of that. In fact, the head of CMS had two jobs to do. She was in charge of infusing as much DEI into medicine as possible and trying to put people on Medicaid rolls, honestly, who don't deserve to be there. Will there be some collateral damage? There's collateral damage with any legislation, Joe, legislation. But it's my job is to try to make sure that there are agreements, not only from the federal government, but also back in the state legislature. I spoke with the Senator Pro Tem Berger, and I pretty much was very firm that, look, if this comes down the pike, the state's going to have to cough up some other monies that it's been trying to pull down from the federal government now. We cannot bankrupt the federal government on issues that the state should be taking care of.
Well, we see a lawmaker like that call it quits, and we've seen a few, Don Bacon and other, and I realize he may have had his own personal issues in making that decision, but you wonder, are you more effective by staying here in office trying to make changes.
Well, I think Senator Tillis has been thinking about this for a while, and this may just have been the last straw.
Sure, of course. Everyone's got their own story. You're going to run for Senate in North Carolina?
Well, I've been asked to. I was on the way over here. I got another text asking me if I'd consider it. So,
well, this is interesting. Are you allowing yourself a certain period of time to make that decision?
Well, but I think, Joe, I did not raise my hand to get into politics a few years ago. I got recruited, and it gives me a little bit of freedom. I can always fall back on being a lowly surgeon full time. And I've said that before. I want to do the right thing. And next week, if we get something done, I think we'll really start to look at this. Who are the players in the game? We can't let a Democrat take this seat. I'm sorry, North Carolina needs a Republican in that seat. And
you wonder what would happen if Roy Cooper became the next senator from North Carolina.
I think that would be problematic. He's been a little too far left and supported things that the Democrat Party right now, good Lord, if you saw what he can look and see what happened with the New York mayor's race, nobody can recognize the Democratic Party anymore. So I'll make that decision next week or the week thereafter. And
so you could take a pay cut for a whole other job as a physician. You just stay here in Washington and make less money.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I'd love to stay in touch with you on that and hear about this deliberation, because I know that's not an easy decision to make. Is that something you're talking to your family about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, just like with all the other decisions, you sit down, you talk with your family, ask the good Lord for some prayers and guidance, and you either walk through doors that are opened up, or you let somebody else that you think can do the job as well walk through too. I've got great colleagues in North Carolina. We just have to make sure we put somebody that can beat a Democrat and be a great senator.
Measure twice, cut once.
That's exactly right.
That's the takeaway here from Greg Murphy. You're going to head back to the House now.
Yeah.
We'll have our eyes on you, and this is going to be wild. Good luck in the next 24 to 48 hours. We'll see if this bill passes.
Great.
Thanks for talking to us.
All right. Thank you, Joe.
From North Carolina, of course, and speaking on behalf of the Republicans here in Washington, some of whom have not made up their mind. And we could still see some changes to this legislation, as we just heard from Congressman Murphy himself.